Do you recite Premadvani after this? No.
Not fully. Not fully. Just one.
Just a short one. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajokacharya Shrotra Shrotra Shishimad Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Shri Guru and Gauranga. Very sensitive. A lot of echo. Can we get rid of the echo? Echo. It's gone. Very good. So, I'm literally very happy, excited to be in your company. It's been a while since my last visit, and I don't even remember when it was. In June. I was here in June. Oh, it seemed, I guess I missed you so much, I felt like it was years. Okay. In the Bhagavad Gita, and then at least in one place in the Srimad Bhagavatam, a difference is pointed out to the reader between Vedavadis and Tattvavadis. Now, Vada means that which is spoken, some kind of philosophical concept, some kind of worldview, some kind of idea. That is what Vada is. And now Veda, we all know what Veda means, refers to Vedic literature. And then Tattva refers to truth. And so in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that there are people who are known as Veda Vada Ratis. Rati means attachment, attraction. So there are those people who are attracted to merely Vedic injunctions, Vedic instructions, stuff that's taught in the Vedas, and which is actually pretty good. But Krishna, in the Bhagavad Gita, discourages Arjuna from being a tattvavadi, Vedavadi, and encourages him to be a tattvavadi. And the same thing is found in the fifth canto of the Bhagavatam. Same difference is pointed out, the difference between a tattvavadi and a Vedavadi. So, what is this difference? On one hand, yes, we should be eager to know what is taught in the Vedas. But on the other hand, it is much more important that we are not studying the Vedas for the mere sake of studying the Vedas. But we should study the Vedas because we want to know the truth. And specifically, we want to know the absolute truth. And there's a difference between absolute and relative truth. Like, relative truth is a truth that it's true only sometimes, under certain conditions. Like, I'm a good person. Maybe now, but maybe not later. Or maybe not before. Etc. So, but what is the absolute truth? Absolute truth is that which is true at all times, in all places, and under all circumstances. And so people who are thoughtful, people who are morally healthy people, they want to know the absolute truth. And in English, they're sometimes also known as truth seekers. And it's interesting that Krishna actually is telling Arjuna to be primarily truth seeker than a mere learner of Vedic injunctions. Why? Because Krishna wants Arjuna to pursue absolute truth, to know what is the absolute truth, what is true at all times, and not to merely get lost in Vedic injunctions. Because Vedic injunctions are actually meant, Vedic injunctions in and of themselves are not the goal. Vedic injunctions are meant to bring us to the absolute truth. And in the Bhagavad Gita and in his commentaries to this section of the fifth canto of the Bhagavatam, Prabhupada says the absolute truth is Krishna. Like if we say Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, this is true at all times and under all circumstances. And we as souls, we are under all circumstances, in all situations and at all times, we are servants of Krishna. The soul is always a servant of Krishna. And so when the soul is not engaged in this capacity, the soul is not living in the absolute truth. And so Vedas are simply meant to bring everyone to the position of absolute truth. And so we find that this is not just a problem in Vedic tradition, this is a problem everywhere. For example, I grew up in a Catholic family, and, well, to a large extent, even though my family considered themselves Catholics, they actually have not even read the Bible, let alone be familiar with what is taught in the Catholic philosophy. But there are many other, like in India, right? Like when I go to India, there's so many people have not read Bhagavad Gita, have not read anything. They just sentimentally know a few things and that's about it. But there are people who actually, from that part of the world where I grew up, who actually study a little bit Catholicism. But they become simply attached to knowing what is taught in Catholicism, rather than thinking, okay, what is this Catholicism, how is this revealing the absolute truth? And so if something is absolute truth, it should be truth at all times and under all circumstances. And therefore, I always like to put Krishna concepts in a perspective which is not Krishna conscious directly. In other words, if what Krishna teaches is true, should be true for all people at all times, in all circumstances, not only for those who are born or are living a Krishna culture, but should be also true for those who are Christians and Muslims and atheists, etc., etc. Should be true for everyone. So if Krishna says that I'm Supreme Personality of Godhead, I'm God and all souls are my servants, then this is true for everyone. This is not a matter of being a follower of Vedas. This is a truth which goes beyond the Vedas, beyond Vedic tradition. It's not a property of those who are Hindus. And so similarly, those who are sophisticated, even though they might be existing, let's say, within Catholic tradition, whatever they study, if they're sophisticated, they should be studying that to learn the absolute truth, not simply to be Catholics. So similarly, we're not interested in being Hindu. We're interested in the absolute truth. And those who don't understand this, they actually don't learn about God. They simply become dogmatic. And so Krishna consciousness is something which is objectively true, and it's always so, in all places, at all times, and under all circumstances, and for all people and animals and plants and cabbage and broccoli and fish and everybody. So, I would like to tell you a story. And this is a story of a relationship between theism and atheism, or, well, we shouldn't call it theism and atheism, but between physics and metaphysics would actually be more precise. Between physics and metaphysics. Like physics, when I say physics, these are the empirical sciences that we know of today, such as chemistry, biology, mathematics, physics, etc. And for the most part, people who study and represent these sciences nowadays are atheists. And by showing you the history of the relationship between these two, then we will come to know why these people are atheists. And what is the proper way to relate to them. So, we'll begin a very long time ago. We'll go back to the what's nowadays called the beginning of European civilization. And this is called classical European civilization. Predates Christianity, so it goes past the Romans, goes back, way back to Greeks. So we talk about like 3,000-4,000 years, something like that. And this civilization, this classical European, anyone here read any Greek authors? Anyone read Iliad and Odyssey? You have not. You have? Did you read that in school, or
Yes.
it was
Required.
It was required. Okay. Where did you go to school?
In London?
Oh, that was in London. Okay. Because I also read that in elementary school. And now when I reflect back, I'm thinking, that's kind of really pushing poor kids to read Iliad and Odyssey in elementary school. Anyone read Plato? Aristotle? These are all people which tremendously influenced history, and they all came from this classical European civilization. And now what's interesting about this classical European civilization sometimes is called, even nowadays, as European Hinduism. In case you may not have known this. But sometimes, even nowadays, is called European Hinduism. Why European Hinduism? And this is very interesting. Why European Hinduism? Because in traditional Indian spirituality, unlike in modern days in the Western world, there was no division, there was no clash between physics and metaphysics. Like, for example, in modern days, there is a very solid separation, segregation between the state and what they call the church. In other words, religion and state are separated. And separated permanently and solidly. For example, you cannot come to the Senate and use religious arguments for or against any proposition. You cannot go to court and in support of your case quote Bhagavad Gita or Bible or whatever. In other words, religion in the modern world has no position in the public life. You can do whatever you want in your private life, but in public life it's considered invalid. This was not the case in the traditional Indian, if you look from point of view of history, in the traditional Indian spirituality or religion. This was not the case. The physics and metaphysics were integrated. And this makes a lot of sense, because physics studies physics. Metaphysics studies metaphysics. How can physics study metaphysics? It's just, to use a plain English word, dumb. Like if I give you measuring tape and I send you out to tell me how hot is it out there, how can you with the measuring tape measure temperatures? It doesn't work. For measuring temperature you have to have thermometer. You cannot have measuring tape. Measuring tape is used for measuring distances. So similarly, biology cannot study metaphysics. Biology cannot study religion. And so this was clearly understood. So therefore physics and metaphysics were two separate sciences that, of course, were joined together. Because in our lives, we clearly exist in two capacities, spiritual and material. Like we all have material bodies, physical bodies, there's so much physical stuff around us. And yet we're metaphysical beings. Like most of our needs are metaphysical, like justice, for example. Justice is not a physical thing. Justice is a metaphysical thing. And this is just the beginning of entering the soul proper, or the spiritual world. So obviously you have to have physics and metaphysics. And this was understood in India. And this was understood in classical Europe to a certain extent. To a large extent, actually, comparatively speaking to what we experience in modern times. And so, therefore, this classical European civilization is nowadays sometimes referred to as European Hinduism. And this went on even through Romans. And then after Romans, there was collapse of Roman Empire. Roman Empire grew so big, separated into two sections. Anyone else? Huh? Knowledge of history? It's very simple, East and West. Because they grew so big, so they separated into two empires, Eastern and Western. And then the European savages, and I say this not because I want to offend someone, but this is literally so. European savages such as Vikings, Huns, all the Germanic tribes. I mean, Europe was, for the most part, savage-like. And these wild people, I don't know, why would Scandinavians be proud of Vikings? There's nothing sophisticated about these people. which is going around Europe killing, looting, stealing, raping, I mean, you name it. And so, as the Roman Empire was weakening, all these tribes were attacking it time and time and time again, and then eventually, Roman Empire collapsed. And with the collapse of Roman Empire, Europe entered a very infamous period, large period of history, which is known as, does anyone know, perhaps? Yes. Dark Ages. Dark Ages. Actually, what they call it? Oh yeah. First it was called Dark Ages, but then the way modern people are, they want to soften everything. So in one point they quit calling it Dark Ages, so they start to call it Middle Ages. But why Dark Ages? Does anyone here know anything about that period of Europe called Dark Ages? Or why was it called Dark Ages?
Because all of the early Greek classical knowledge was lost.
Yes. And what was going on?
Well, the early Christianity was...
Early Christianity, yeah. Can we be more specific? No, okay. That's okay. I mean, I'm not here to teach history, but I want to put in perspective so you understand what are we dealing with in modern times. What you have during the Dark Ages, you have literally Europe sinking in darkness of ignorance. There's no hardly any production of anything sophisticated. Music, literature, thought, philosophy, none of it. I mean, a little bit here and there, but really, and what you have is a formulation of church, a Christian, very specifically Catholic church, that grew to immense power. And this is, what I'm about to say, this has nothing to do with the theology or philosophy of modern Catholic Church. This is just one horrible period that a group of people who call themselves Catholic Church sank into. For example, this Catholic Church literally went around and was killing people for crime thoughts. For crime thoughts. So, in other words, they had power, they had brute force. In other words, they had their soldiers that went around, they had their spies that went around, and these people would go around and they would study other people, and if they felt that you had a wrong thought, they would torture you. They would torture you so bad, so slowly, and for such a long time, that of course you could not bear this. And then at the end, you would admit your guilt. Like you would say, yes, I did it, just don't torture me anymore. In other words, you would admit to have had a wrong thought, even perhaps you did not have it. And then they would execute you publicly. And so they were doing this wholesale everywhere, all over the place. And if you want to do an experiment, when you go home tonight, if you want to have really bad dreams, go on your computer, go on the internet, and type in Dark Ages. And then look up images that come up. In Google search for images, Dark Ages. And the mostly imagery that you're going to get are these horrible torturing devices that these people invented to torture other people. Like so horrible. I'm tempted to describe just one, just so you know how horrible this is, because it definitely beats your expectations. But I think I won't do it because it's really gross. I'll leave that up to you. If you want to have nightmares, you can do it.
More than Jomaloka.
What is it?
More than Jomaloka punishment.
More than?
Jomaloka.
Yeah, but
Yamraj, sadist.
but more than I don't
He
understand.
said that yes,
Oh, more than worse than torture.
worse than torture.
Yeah. It almost seems like they had trade going on with Yamaraj and they were importing devices from hell. It was really horrible. It was so horrible. And by the way, this did not last just a few years. This lasted, let me see. Dark Ages lasted from 6th through the 13th century. So this is what? 700 years. 700 years. And this is... Women were killed left and right. It was really risky to be a woman in those days. Like, let's say you were a woman and someone's, I don't know, you were somewhere or other, you got stuck in your fields, you're working your field and the sun is setting and you, I didn't notice, I have to go home. And someone saw you walking in the dark and reported you to the church. I saw a witch, she's a witch. I saw her walking in the dark. And you get tortured. Not only that, but it goes even worse than that. Because this group of people who organized themselves in this religious institution, they claimed that God spoke through them and through their institution. So whatever crazy thing they came up with, they claim it to be hand of God and the will of God. And so whatever their interpretation of reality, of world, of religion, of concepts of morality, good and bad, etc., whatever they came up with, whatever hit their crazy brains, they claim it to be straight from God. And so, for example, I mean, they introduced all kinds of things, like Trinity. It's nowhere in the Bible. Holy Trinity, for example. Nowhere to be found in the Bible. But if you didn't believe in Holy Trinity, and a very specific type of Holy Trinity, off with your head. And not only that they kill you, but again, they torture you. And if you really want to know how nasty these people were, go online and just type Dark Ages and search for images. These people were really crazy. And this went on for centuries, 700 years. And so if you were not a Christian, you were in trouble. And if you were a Christian and they thought you did, even if they just thought you didn't believe what they thought you should believe, off with your head. It was this bad. And then there was a huge economic difference between higher and lower classes of society, which very often happens. Okay, not a big deal, we can live with that somehow or other. But there was a huge also difference between availability of justice. So if you're from a higher caste, you could do nearly anything you wanted. And if you were a peasant, which in Indian terms would mean a Shudra, you were literally a property of these people. And if they didn't like the color of your eyes, you'd be tortured. And so this went on for a very long time. And so after some time, in the 14th century, Europe, specifically Southern Europe, started to sort of wake up. And this is called European Renaissance. And it really started happening in the Mediterranean Europe. We're talking about primarily France and Italy, even more so Italy. So Italy and France, they're sort of waking up. But they're still not waking up in any kind of significantly philosophical way. They're just waking up in terms of, they're starting to be productive in terms of art and music and they're seeking to be alive again. they're seeking to express themselves in artistic ways, etc., etc., etc. This is called European Renaissance. Renaissance means to come to life again, to wake up. As the Southern Europe sort of wakes up, there is also Northern Europe. There's something going on in North Europe. But for the most part, in North Europe, we find scientific revolution. And now this is what brings us to the crux of the matter. In Northern Europe, we have scientific revolution. What's a scientific revolution? Anyone knows? Any clues?
Industrialization.
Industrialization, yeah, but specifically scientific revolution.
Astronomy.
Astronomy was one of the aspects of this. In other words, people got sick and tired of this rather small group of people telling them what world is about and interpreting world in ways which made no sense. Like the earth is flat, and if you walk long enough you'll just fall off of the edge. And they say, well, I kind of don't think so. And so people, there's this craving in people to actually, to rationally look into the world and dig into this world and see what is this world? What's going on around? And so we have in North Europe waking up of this scientific revolution. So people empirically want to know, okay, you say the earth is flat, well, let's look at it. And then actually, upon looking at it, they say, well, it doesn't make any sense. Doesn't make any sense. I mean, it seems to be actually round. And so what you have at this point, it's a big clash between these two groups. Now, at the same time, when this scientific revolution goes on, of course, we mentioned Renaissance, there's scientific revolution, but there's also Protestant Reformation. Is anyone here familiar with Protestant Reformation? Martin Luther, not King, but a little bit, okay. Okay. So, what was the big thing about Luther? To Luther,
Luther, he rebelled. He was a priest who rebelled against the administration of the Catholic Church.
Thank you. He actually started off as a monk in the Catholic Church, but then, I mean, all kinds of things are going on in this Catholic Church. All kinds of things. Like in India also sometimes. People think they'll become purified by... Anyhow, I have some other time about that. But, for example, in Catholic Church, people thought... The Church taught people that you can buy purity. And you find this in India also. People think, merely if I do a ritual, if I give money, I'll become pure. Well, it's nice that you're giving, but you have to understand you're giving for the sake of giving. You cannot become pure, you cannot buy purity. So Catholic Church was like selling salvation. Like if you die and if you leave your property to the church, you're definitely going back to Godhead. I don't know. You go back to Godhead only if you're pure devotee. This makes sense, right? And in India you had the same thing. Brahmins, caste Brahmins, this is why Indian religion collapsed. Because Indian Brahmins were doing the same thing, same stupid thing. You pay us to do a ritual for you and then you'll be okay. But you can do rituals till the cows come home and still be a demon. You have to want to purify your heart and then perhaps engage in the ritual. And so these kind of things were going on, and all kinds of really bizarre stuff was going on. And so the Luther, he did, of course, he was an intelligent, educated person. He couldn't stand this stuff. And he rebelled against it. And the church threatened to do all kinds of things to him. But interesting thing, because at this time the Industrial Revolution is also kicking in big time, and so they invented the printing press. Now, why printing? Why is printing press important? Well, it's hard for us to imagine world before the printing press. And the internet also. Nowadays, if you want the world to know something, you just send an email or put it somewhere on the web, on the internet, and the whole world knows. But previously, if you had an idea and you wanted other people to know this idea, what do? There's no printing press. Well, you're gonna write by hand 10,000 flyers? How will you spread your idea? There's no printing press. You can't print a book. You can write a book, like in India. You write a book and there's one book, and it's kept on the altar. And if you want to read it, you take shower, you get a permission from the priest, you offer puja, and then you reverently read it a little bit, put it back, and that's it. And for the most part, you memorize. So how do you spread your idea? Whereas Catholic Church grew so big, and it was like pervasive all over Europe. And so they had their channels through which they distributed ideas. And they had their soldiers. What were they called? Knights? Crusades, thank you. They basically went around killing for church. That's what they did. Those who were not Christians and those who were Christians but not right type of Christians. That's what they did. And so the church had a system. Every town and village had a church, if not two. And then at least once a week people would come to the church to be indoctrinated. And then those who would refuse to be indoctrinated, they'd be tortured and killed, etc. So they had a very good system of indoctrinating everyone. And so if you didn't agree with them and you wanted everyone else to know why you do not agree with them, you had no means of telling them. But when the printing press was invented, now you could print stuff. So while we have printing press, don't forget to use it to propagate Christian consciousness. People like Luther started to print stuff, flyers, books, and all this was distributed around. So intelligent people and common people could actually get to hear people opposing this insane nonsense going on. Excuse me. Now this in turn loosens the grip of the Catholic Church on people. So people become even more bold to learn about the world by empirical ways. Not just by listening to what the Bible told them or to what the priest told them. But they wanted to know on their own. And so now every time there is a change, every change is a struggle. Every change is a struggle. Even when someone is trying to become a devotee, or even if one is a devotee and is trying to become a better devotee, all of these things require a change. And every change is a challenge. Every change is a challenge. It's a difficulty. Now, every organism, like we are all, in a sense, organisms. And if there is a danger, if there is a threat to our comfort, security, well-being, happiness, comfort, etc., etc., we immediately react So for example, if someone is about to hit us, we instantly go like this. Put our hands. We instinctively protect ourselves. And so similarly, groups of people are also organisms. And so when there is a change, and change means challenge of the status quo, challenge of the situation as it is, so the group of people, just like one single organism, as a one large group, reacts and defends itself. And if you want to study psychology of people as individuals and as groups, just study a little bit of history. And every time there is a change, even Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada, when he came to America, he had so many changes to introduce. And for example, anyone here read the Hare Krishna Explosion book by Hayagriva? You have? You have, okay. Few. Please read it, it's a good book to read. One thing is obvious from that book, that devotees loved and hated Prabhupada. What did he say? Yes, I said it. They loved and they hated Prabhupada. Not everyone, but many devotees. They became so attracted to Prabhupada. And so Prabhupada did not want to leave it all on some sentimental, bubbly level, but he wanted devotees to genuinely become pure devotees. So over time he kept tightening the standards, introducing newer and newer things. So in one point, for example, Prabhupada told devotees not to eat food which is not prepared by devotees. And they would still do it. There was a donut shop close by, they would go to a donut shop. Malati might have told you. Never? Malati Mataji never told? Like in San Francisco, they would go to a donut shop and they would eat donuts. And Prabhupada told them not to. And so they saw Prabhupada coming, and so they all ducked down. And they waited, and they thought he probably moved on. And then they got up, and Prabhupada was there looking at them. Busted. And he just moved on. And then Prabhupada introduced the morning program. You have to get up. Then Prabhupada introduced segregation, not segregation in a negative sense, because Americans, when say segregation, they think of a bad thing, but segregate means to separate. But cultural separation of men and women, that men and women don't mingle too much intimately, and things like that. And devotees, and then philosophical things that Prabhupada was introducing. Umapati Swami, when he was a young brahmachari, he says he was the first devotee to bloop, and he blooped many times. Bloop means left Prabhupada. He left Prabhupada and then he came back. Because just Prabhupada was demanding things which were very painful for him. That's the nature of change. When you change things, it's a challenge. Also communities, for many people it's just nice to just sit as we are, it's so comfortable. But no! For the sake of Krishna we have to grow, and grow means challenge. Means sacrificing our comfort. And we often communities, when they grow, then certain members of the community become aggressive because they do not want to change. So aggression is a very typical response to change. Very typical response to challenge. And so Prabhupada experienced this. So some devotees, they hated Prabhupada because they loved him. They were so attracted to him, and yet he kept tightening the standards. Stop it! Don't do that! And some of them, like Kumapati, I'm mentioning him because he himself did so many times. He's now laughing at it, right? But back then that was the case. It was very uncomfortable about Prabhupada. And so very similar thing you have here. What do you have? You have church responding to this new way of learning about the world in very, very aggressive ways. Very aggressive ways. To the point that, for example, in one point, those who taught and believed that the earth is not a flat surface were literally tortured. Not just mentally, but physically. You were not allowed to think like that. Which is actually a very good lesson, because sometimes in Krishna consciousness we have certain paradigms, and then when someone from the scientific community comes, or even our children who may be going to modern schools and they hear something from these empiricists, and then they come home and then they challenge your Krishna conscious paradigm, and you simply become angry. That's not good. You're same like the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages. You have to know. If Krishna consciousness is right, then you have to show. One reason why Indian spirituality collapsed is because Brahmins became uneducated and stupid. They had no good answers to good questions. And so you yourselves, for the sake of your own spiritual lives, you need to know if someone is asking you a question, you cannot just say, oh, that's from that stupid demonic scientific community. Well, the question might be good. How do you answer it? You cannot behave like a fanatic. You may not know the answer. Okay, you say, I don't know the answer. I will look into it. But eventually we should not, what I'm trying to say, we should not behave like the Catholic Church. And it's not just Catholic. In India you have this, and you have it everywhere. The humans are humans wherever you go. So at this point what you have is representatives of metaphysics, right? The spiritual representatives, the religious people. They literally prosecute the physicists or the empiricists. The biologists, the chemists, mathematicians, they're all prosecuted. There was no question of engaging in rational discussion. It was just, you're evil, that's not in the Bible, kill him. And this went on for a very long time. Even Luther, I mean, to a certain extent he's seen as a figure who contributed to scientific revolution, but also in some sense he was like the way Luther treated Copernicus. It was just ridiculous. He publicly called him a fool and an idiot, etc., 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 just because he was a scientist. And because his concepts, which he, by studying the earth and nature, by studying the nature, the world, he came to different conclusions to those that were in the Bible. And so Luther simply called him a fool and he did publicly. He put pressure on him. And so this went on. Now psychologically what happens is that that abused tend to become abusers. Like if you look at people nowadays, people who are abusive, like abusive parents, abusive mother or abusive father or abusive children, they're usually behaving so because they themselves were abused. And so this is a typical psychological response, that the abused become abusers. And so after centuries of being abused, and even nowadays, religious people tend to abuse empiricists in the ways which I mentioned earlier. Like if empiricist comes with an intelligent question, then the religious people just say, you're a demon, shut up. Well, what if it's a good question, why don't you answer it? By the way, this is one of the reasons why I, at an early age, became an atheist. Because my local priest had no good answers to my questions. Why would I trust him? Like, he can't answer my questions. Why would I trust him? Why in the world would I suspend my intelligence and just become a blind follower of anyone? Like the church turned into a monster, or the caste Brahmins of India. Caste Brahmins of India tortured poor Indians for centuries also, and it's still going on to a certain extent. And so so what happened in due course of time, up until, I mean, as the Industrial Revolution spread and developed and gained momentum, things started to change. People started to believe more and more these empiricists, to the point that the state, that the secular state separated itself from the religion. So you have, for example, first Europeans, when they came to America, as soon as they provided for the basic needs, food, shelter, etc., they immediately started places of education. So some of the nowadays most prestigious universities in the world were actually Christian institutions that were started by Christians who wanted to make sure that their children remain Christians. But in due course of their studies, they abandoned their own religion and became materialists. Because religion was very abusive and dogmatic, not rational. And so when you speak, for example, nowadays, let's just fast forward to today. Today, for example, if you, just one detail. In modern academia, monotheism or monotheistic concepts are called sectarian. And this is a technical term. Like, if you, do they have a UC Davis, right? You go to UC Davis, and plant yourself in academic environment among the academians. And if you want to discuss monotheism, they will refer to it as sectarianism. Do you know why? Because you're sectarian. You're just narrowing yourself to one deity. That's monotheism. So you're sectarian. And this obviously makes no sense. This makes no sense. This is simply an inimical response of the academia that's been tortured for centuries by religion. Specifically monotheistic religion. And if you look, I mean, I actually printed here because one devotee gave me this idea, so I put it in. I looked it up in the dictionary. What does sectarian mean? Denoting or concerning a sect or sects, like ethnic and sectarian differences. This is pejorative. Of an action carried out on the grounds of membership of a sect, denomination, or other group. A sectarian attack. etc., etc., etc. You know, this is the kind of terminology they associate with monotheism. So modern youth, like a typical American that you meet nowadays, if you speak of God, to a large extent, they will have an emotional response of blocking you and your ideas out. But if you speak about energy, if you speak about philosophy, even modern academia, when they study Indian religiosity or Indian religion or religions, for example, when they study Shankaracharya, they refer to Shankaracharya as a philosopher. But when they discuss, let's say, Yamunacharya, because Madhva, you all know Shankaracharya was an impersonalist, right?
Yeah.
And Ramanuja, let's say Ramanuja best. When they refer to Ramanuja, they refer to him as a religious person, not a philosopher. Why? They're both studying the same thing, philosophy, worldview, trying to interpret what is this world, what are we doing in this world. This is philosophy. But Shankara is a philosopher, whereas Ramanuja is a priest. This kind of sectarianism goes on. And if you speak to these people, they have no good reasons. They have no good reasons. Anyone heard of these names like Sam Harris, whatever his name is? No? Are you fortunate? This guy's a real... rascal. He's one of these modern, very outspoken, very loud atheists. But you hear his lectures, they're just speaking as a philosopher, they're really horrible. I mean, he should be embarrassed to speak in public. They're so bad. Or what's that God delusion guy? Dawkins, Richard Dawkins. Anyone heard of that guy?
Yeah.
Okay, he's a little more popular. I mean, just in terms of philosophy, if you read that book, I didn't read it, but just certain excerpts. I mean, they're so philosophically naive. It's embarrassing. I'd be embarrassed to publish that kind of a book. So obviously these people are not atheists for any logical reasons. And both of them are very educated